Matteo Caruso checked his watch again. 6:43. He had no idea why he'd agreed to this. His sister had begged him to go, just one blind date. Matteo, you need to talk to someone who isn't one of your associates or someone asking for favors. He had caved only to stop her relentless calls. Now he sat at a small cafe on Main Street in the sleepy Vermont town he'd retreated 2 years ago, a place that still smelled of rain-soaked pine and roasted espresso. But beneath that, if you knew where to look, the scent of old wood and leather lingered, the kind of place that had been here long before boutique coffee became fashionable. It was too warm inside, the chatter too close, the cafe's exposed brick walls, dark wooden beams, and dim amber lighting felt like a world away from the life he'd left behind. He had promised himself he'd give this exactly 15 minutes. Then he could leave with a polite nod and a clear conscience. When the door opened, he barely looked up. A gust of cold air slipped in, followed by a woman's quiet voice. Matteo Caruso? He turned. She stood by his table, slightly out of breath, blonde hair twisted loosely into a soft bun, a few curls falling against her cheek. Her dress was a simple floral pattern, not designer but graceful. Her eyes were light blue, alert yet gentle. "I'm so sorry I'm late," she said. "The roads are terrible tonight." "It's all right," Matteo replied, rising automatically. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please." She smiled and sat, setting her small purse beside her. "Thank you for waiting. I almost thought you'd leave." "I considered it," he admitted, his voice low and even. Her laugh was genuine, and somehow it disarmed him. They ordered black espresso for him, chamomile tea for her, and for a few minutes the conversation skimmed the surface. Work, weather, how small the town still felt. She didn't mention his businesses, didn't ask about the properties he owned, or the quiet influence he carried. It was oddly refreshing. Just as he began to relax, she leaned forward slightly, studying him. "You don't remember me, do you?" Matteo went still. "I'm sorry?" A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "You saved me once, Matteo, when I was just a hungry kid hiding behind the book stacks." The words hit him like a soft but sudden blow. His fingers stilled around the espresso cup. Saved her? A hungry kid? Book stacks? He searched her face, the curve of her smile, the glimmer of memory that refused to form. Nothing clear, just a flicker, a whisper of a moment buried somewhere deep. He started, but the words fell away. Across from him, the blonde woman, Tessa, only smiled a little wider, her blue eyes steady. Matteo didn't remember, but something in her tone, in the quiet certainty of it, pressed against a locked place in his mind, a place he wasn't sure he wanted to open. Matteo stared at her, unsure how to respond. Across the table, Tessa held his gaze with calm confidence, as if she'd expected his confusion. She took a slow sip of her tea, letting the silence linger. "I'm sorry, Beth," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I really don't remember." "I didn't think you would," she replied gently, setting her cup down. "You were a teenager. I was a scrawny little girl in hand-me-downs. You had no reason to notice me." Matteo leaned back slightly. "And yet you're here." Tessa gave a small shrug, almost playful. "I figured if fate was bold enough to toss us into a blind date together, I should at least say thank you properly." He studied her expression. She didn't seem to be manipulating him. No hint of an angle, no attempt to make him feel guilty, just honesty, a rare thing in his world. The server returned with their dinner orders. He had defaulted to something simple, grilled chicken with rosemary, while she chose butternut squash soup and a side salad. Comfort food. As they began to eat, Matteo asked, "So what do you do now when you're not catching people off guard on blind dates?" Tessa smiled. "I work part-time as a librarian, the public library in town." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Still hiding behind the book stacks, then?" "Only during story time," she teased, then added, "It's mostly so I can spend more time with my daughter." "You have a daughter?" He was genuinely surprised. "Laia Bia," she said with a warm smile. "She's 4, loves ballet, pink dresses, and dinosaur picture books." Matteo let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Sounds like a handful. She is. Tessa nodded, her smile turning soft, proud. But she's the best part of my life. He found himself curious. Where's your husband? Her gaze flicked down for a brief second. There never really was one. It's just been me and Leia from the beginning. He nodded, respectful of her boundaries. That must be hard. Tessa gave a light shrug. Sometimes, but this town makes it easier. People look out for each other, mostly. Mateo's eyes drifted around the room. It's changed a little, but not much. You used to live here, didn't you? She asked. He hesitated. Yeah, a long time ago. My family moved away when I was 15. What happened? He met her eyes, debating, then quietly. My father's business ended badly. We lost everything. My mother passed away a few months after we left. Tessa's expression softened. I'm sorry. He nodded once. It's fine. It was a long time ago. There was a pause, then she asked, Do you remember the library at all? Barely, he admitted. I used to stop there after school. It was quiet, peaceful. You brought a sandwich and orange juice every day, she said. He looked at her, startled. I remember, she continued, her voice quieter now. I used to sit near the children's section and pretend I was reading, but mostly I was just trying not to be hungry. One day you left your lunch on the table and walked away. You didn't say a word. I waited 10 minutes before touching it because I thought maybe it was a mistake. It wasn't, he said automatically, surprising even himself. She smiled. I figured that out eventually. And after that, every few days, you'd leave your lunch in the same spot. No note, no conversation, just kindness. Mateo's jaw tightened, emotions he couldn't name stirring behind his ribs. I never knew your name back then, she added. Not until tonight. He sat in stunned silence. A blurry image flickered in his memory, his hand setting down a brown paper bag next to a silent small girl with tangled blonde hair. He hadn't thought about that in years, maybe ever. I didn't think anyone noticed, he said quietly. I did, Tessa replied, and I never forgot. Mateo looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a date, not as a stranger, but as someone tied to a version of himself he'd long buried. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like Mateo Caruso, the man people stepped carefully around. He just felt human. The next morning, Mateo sat in his office above one of his properties downtown, staring at the untouched espresso growing cold beside his ledger. He had told himself he was leaving town for business in Boston by noon. Meetings awaited, arrangements had to be made. But something about last night lingered. Tessa's voice, her story, the way her words had pulled a forgotten part of him back into focus. He told himself it was curiosity, that was all. By early afternoon, he found himself parking across from the public library. The building was small, brick-faced with ivy curling around the windows. It looked exactly as he remembered it, and somehow nothing like it at all. He hesitated at the entrance, then pushed the door open. The warmth hit first, followed by the scent of old paper and vanilla-scented cleaner. Children's laughter echoed softly from the far corner. He stepped inside. In the children's section, tucked between shelves painted like trees, a small group of toddlers and preschoolers sat on mushroom-shaped cushions, listening to a young woman read from a picture book. And right in the center, by her, twirling slowly in a pink dress and ballet slippers, was a little girl. She spun with arms overhead, hair in a tiny bun, completely absorbed in her imaginary performance. Mateo stopped. That had to be her. Leia. Before he could decide whether to interrupt, the girl spotted him. She stopped mid-twirl, tilted her head, and marched right over. You, she said matter-of-factly, pointing a tiny finger up at him. Are you Mom's friend from the date? Mateo's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Every head in the reading circle turned. Even the librarian glanced up with raised eyebrows. Tessa appeared from behind a nearby shelf, clearly having overheard. Leia, she hissed, trying not to laugh. Let's not shout our personal business across the whole library. Mateo, thoroughly caught off guard, managed a slight smile. I knew it, Leia said triumphantly, ignoring her mother's gentle scolding. You're the man from the date, the one with the serious face. Mateo's expression softened. Serious face? Tessa approached, hands full of children's books. She looked amused. I told her a little about you. Apparently, I may have described you as intense. You said he looked like a statue with a tie, Leia announced proudly. Mateo let out a short laugh despite himself. Well, that's one I haven't heard before. Tessa shrugged with a smirk. She's brutally honest. Gets it from her grandmother. Leia leaned in closer, studying his face with unfiltered curiosity. Then she whispered, not quietly at all, Mr. Mateo, you're not scary at all. Mateo went still. Something in his chest cracked open just a little. I promise I'm not scary, he told her softly. I just forget how to smile sometimes. Leia nodded as if that made perfect sense. You should practice. Smiling makes your eyebrows go up. It's better. He found himself genuinely smiling, his shoulders loosened. Tessa gave him a long, warm look. What brings you here anyway? He cleared his throat. I was in the area. You came to a library in a town you haven't visited in over 10 years just to be in the area. He met her gaze. Maybe I was curious. About me or about her ballet routine? She asked, nodding toward Leia, who had already returned to her pirouettes among the bookshelves. Both, he admitted. They stood side by side, watching the little girl spin and giggle, the light catching in her pink tulle skirt. And for the first time since he'd returned, Mateo didn't feel like a stranger in this town. He just felt seen. Mateo showed up at Tessa's door just after 5, holding a brightly illustrated book in one hand. Leia dropped this, he said as soon as she opened the door. She was too busy twirling through the nonfiction aisle. Tessa blinked, then smiled. Oh no, not dancing dinosaurs. She's been asking for that one for days. He handed it over, figured it might be important. She laughed softly. You figured right. She paused. Want to come in for a minute? Mateo hesitated, then nodded. The house was small and older, but tidy and warm. Faded wallpaper, framed drawings clearly made by little hands, the faint smell of cinnamon and crayons lingering in the air. It was the kind of home built slowly, with care, not money. He followed her into the living room. Leia's tiny shoes were neatly lined up by the door, her pink ballet bag resting nearby. Leia's with the neighbor, Tessa explained. They're making cookies. I only agreed because she promised not to touch the oven. Smart. I've learned to pick my battles. As Mateo glanced around, his eye caught something on the dining table. A stack of mail. A pale yellow envelope sat half open on top. He wasn't trying to look, but the bold letters across the top were hard to miss. Final notice. Foreclosure warning. Tessa noticed his pause. Her smile faltered. She crossed the room quickly, scooping up the papers and pressing them against her chest. It's nothing, she said too quickly. Mateo turned to her. Tessa, it's just a delay in payments. I'll work it out. Her tone was firm, almost defensive. I didn't ask you here to talk about my bills. I didn't think you did, he said gently. But I'd like to help. She shook her head. No, that's not why I invited you in. I know. He took a step closer. What if we worked on something together? I could fund an education program through the library. Something permanent. Expand the kids section. Hire more staff. Tessa's expression shut down before he could finish. Mateo, she said quietly, I don't want to be your charity. He blinked, caught off guard. That's not what this is. It might not feel that way to you, she replied, her voice calm but steady. But to me, that's exactly what it feels like. He ran a hand through his hair. Tessa, I'm making an offer, that's all. Easy for you to say, she said, arms folding. You walk in, see a foreclosure notice, and suddenly you're ready to fix it all like it's just another problem. But this isn't business. This is my life. I know that. Do you? She asked softly. Because I've spent years building this life, this home for Leia, without help, and I don't want the first person who steps in to fix things just because he can afford to. Mateo felt the sting behind her words. Not anger, just disappointment, and a wall rising between them. Not my intention, he said quietly. Tessa's expression softened slightly, but her eyes stayed guarded. I know, and I appreciate that you care. But this town has seen its share of powerful men swoop in and save things. They always leave, and they usually take something with them. He looked down, the weight of unspoken history pressing between them. After a long silence, he said, I didn't come to take anything from you. I know, she whispered. But she didn't say more, and he didn't stay long after that. As he stepped out into the cool twilight, the book still fresh in his memory, so was the look in her eyes. Pride, fear, and something else he couldn't name. He had offered help, but maybe in her world, there was no difference between help and control. It was nearly midnight when Mateo's phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He'd just returned from a meeting in Burlington, the kind where nothing was said directly but everything was understood, and was about to shut down for the night. But when he saw the caller ID, Mrs. Jameson, Tessa's neighbor, he picked up immediately. Mr. Caruso, the woman's voice was strained. I didn't know who else to call. Leia's very sick. Tessa's trying to drive her to the hospital, but her car won't start. She's panicking. On my way, Mateo said before she could finish. He didn't change, just grabbed his keys and coat and was out the door in seconds. The drive from his property on the lake to the edge of town took him less than usual. The roads were slick with freezing rain, but he knew these streets. He kept one hand tight on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. His mind spun with images. Leia curled up in her pink dress, Tessa's calm cracking, her worry deeper than pride could hide. When he finally pulled up to Tessa's darkened street, she was sitting on the porch steps in a sweatshirt and leggings, cradling Leia in her lap. The little girl was burning with fever, her face flushed, her arms limp around her mother's neck. Without a word, Mateo got out, opened the passenger door, and held out his arms. Tessa hesitated for a second. Then she handed Leia over. She just started burning up, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know what else to do. She'll be fine, Mateo said quietly. I'll make sure. He drove them to St. Vincent's Medical Center, the only hospital in the region equipped for pediatric emergencies. He gave no explanation, no introduction, just one phone call from the parking lot. By the time they walked through the doors, a nurse was already waiting. Mr. Caruso, she said with quiet efficiency, we have a room ready. Tessa stared at him as they were ushered past the waiting area, past the intake desk, directly into a private wing. Mateo said nothing. He just stayed close. While the nurses checked Leia in, Tessa remained by her daughter's side. Mateo stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, watching through the glass. When Tessa finally emerged, eyes red but steadier, he handed her a bottle of water. She's stable, she said. They gave her fluids. Said it was a strong flu. If the fever drops in a few hours, we can take her home. Mateo exhaled slowly. Good. Tessa sat beside him on the waiting room bench, hands trembling slightly in her lap. I can't believe this is happening. I couldn't even afford the intake fee. If you hadn't— No debts, he interrupted softly. Not between us. She said nothing. Later, after Leia was moved to a recovery room, Tessa left briefly to talk to the discharge nurse. Mateo stayed. The room was dim, lit only by a small reading lamp in the corner. Leia slept fitfully, cheeks pink, her little fists curled by her chin. Mateo sat beside her to him, a children's picture book open in his lap. One of the ones she'd proudly recommended at the library. He read quietly, his voice steady, calm. Every so often, he dipped a cloth in cool water and wiped her forehead. When Tessa returned, she stopped in the doorway. Mateo was still reading, his voice low and warm. Leia had shifted in her sleep, her head resting lightly against his arm, breathing evenly. He looked up when he noticed her. I hope it's okay, he said softly. She was asking for you. Then she just drifted off. Tessa nodded slowly, stepping inside. I've never seen anyone do that for us, she whispered. Her voice cracked. Mateo looked at her, really looked, and something shifted between them. The air felt different now, not heavier, but more honest. You two shouldn't have to do everything alone, he said. Tessa walked over and sat beside him, silent for a moment. She reached out and gently brushed a curl from Leia's damp forehead. She's lucky you were here. I'm lucky she trusts me, he said. They sat together in the quiet hum of the room. No words left to fill the silence, just the soft breathing of a child and the quiet, unexpected peace of not feeling alone. They walked in silence beneath the canopy of early spring trees, the hospital now far behind them. Leia had been discharged an hour earlier, her fever finally broken. She was back home, asleep in her bed, curled around a stuffed dinosaur. Tessa had offered Mateo coffee as a thank you, but he'd suggested a walk instead. Now the two of them strolled slowly through the quiet residential streets of the town Mateo hadn't visited in years. "It hasn't changed much," he murmured. Tessa glanced up at him. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Used to be the worst thing in the world." They walked a few more steps before he spoke again, his voice lower. "My mother died here." Tessa looked at him gently but said nothing. "We left town not long after," he continued. "My father's business. It didn't collapse. That's what we told people. The truth is he was killed. A deal gone wrong. I was 15. Everyone we thought were friends disappeared overnight. We couldn't stay." Tessa stopped walking. Mateo slowed beside her. "And then she got sick," he said quietly. "I hated this place for a long time," he admitted. "Every corner, every street, just reminded me of what we lost, what I couldn't protect." "You were a kid," she said softly. He nodded, jaw tight. "I know that now. But for a long time I thought if I worked hard enough, built something strong enough, earned enough respect, maybe I could rewrite all that." Tessa looked at him, eyes searching. "And did it work?" He let out a breath. "I built the businesses. The money came. Respect. But none of it ever felt like enough." A light breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Mateo turned to face her fully. "But when I walked into that library and saw Laia twirling in her little pink dress, and you smiling like the world wasn't falling apart, I didn't feel like I needed to fix anything. I just wanted to be there." Tessa's expression softened. "That's a big thing for someone who sees the world in terms of problems to solve." "I don't want to solve you," he said, "or her. I just want to be part of whatever this is." They stood in silence, the air thick with something tender and real. Then Tessa said quietly, "Maybe you left the pain here, and now you're finding the healing." Mateo blinked. The words hung in the space between them, gentle but profound. For a man who'd spent most of his life measuring things in power and control, her words felt like truth. Not something to quantify, just something to feel. He looked up at the familiar sky, the same one that had once watched a broken boy leave town in silence. Now it saw a man choosing to stay. The knock on Tessa's door came just after sunset. She wasn't expecting anyone, and when she opened it, the sight of the man standing there made her heart drop. "Hello, Tess," he said smoothly. She instinctively stepped in front of the doorway, shielding Leia's drawings taped to the wall behind her. "Derek," she said, voice tight, "what are you doing here?" "I heard you're doing well," he said, glancing over her shoulder. "Met someone. A real connected guy, huh?" She didn't respond. Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thought I should check in. You know, since I never really got my chance to be part of Leia's life." Tessa crossed her arms. "You had chances. You just didn't take them." "Well," he said, shrugging, "maybe it's time I did." The meaning behind his words chilled her. She closed the door without another word. 2 days later, she was served with custody papers. The official notice shook her more than she wanted to admit. Derek had never cared before. He'd never paid a cent in child support. But now, suddenly, he wanted to play the father card. Because of Mateo. Because he saw what she had, or what he thought she was about to have. Tessa stared at the legal document, her hands trembling. Later that night, when Mateo came by with dinner and one of Leia's forgotten stuffed animals, she tried to hide it. But he saw the papers on the kitchen counter. He read the headline and looked at her. "Tessa," he said softly, "you don't have to do this alone." She shook her head. "I'm not letting you get involved." "Why not?" "Because if I do," she said, her voice shaking, "and I lose, then it will feel like I lost everything." Mateo stepped closer. "This isn't about pride anymore." "It is to me," she snapped, then softened. "I know your world, Mateo. Power, favors, control. But that's not mine. I can't let you fight my battles." He didn't argue, he just nodded. But when he left that night, he made one call. His people went to work. He told them only two things. Help her without ever mentioning his name, and make sure Leia never gets pulled into something ugly. The courtroom was small, quiet, filled with shadows and tension. Tessa sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, barely hearing her attorney speak. Derek sat across from her, clean-shaven, wearing a borrowed suit and a smug expression. She hated how much power he still thought he had. Then the judge began reading from a letter that had been submitted with her file, anonymous but thorough. It detailed a private educational trust set aside for Laya's schooling, full medical coverage until age 18, and a commitment to support her quietly without interference or public attention. No conditions, no strings. Tessa turned in her seat. In the very last row, near the door, Mateo sat alone. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. She pressed her lips together, tears threatening. When the judge awarded her full custody and denied Derek's petition due to years of absence and lack of financial support, she closed her eyes and breathed for the first time in days. Outside, the spring air was still. Tessa stepped down the courthouse steps, spotting Mateo near the sidewalk. She walked over slowly. "I told you not to get involved," she said quietly. "You told me not to fight for you," he replied. "So I didn't. I fought for her." Tessa blinked and something inside her cracked wide open. "You did all that without needing credit." "I did it because I could," he said simply, "and because she deserves a future with her mom. Safe, secure, uninterrupted." Tessa swallowed hard. "Thank you." Mateo gave a small smile. "No debts." She took his hand. "I know," she whispered, "but I'm giving it anyway." 3 months later, the town looked different. Not in the way of buildings or streets, but in the way it felt to Mateo as he stepped out of his newly opened office tucked above the cafe where he'd first met Tessa. The mornings were quieter here. The people were seated, and for the first time in years, his schedule had breathing space built into it. Half the week he handled business. The other half he was here, in the town he'd once run from, now slowly becoming home again. That morning he adjusted his shirt collar in the mirror and glanced at the small box on his desk. Not velvet, not brand new, just an old keepsake box with smooth edges and a gold hinge slightly worn from time. Inside, nestled on a cushion, was a ring. Not an engagement ring. Not yet. He tucked it into the desk drawer and headed out. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly expanded children's wing of the library was already underway when he arrived. Tessa stood at the front, welcoming local families. Her hair swept into a loose bun, cheeks flushed from excitement. Leia ran ahead in her signature pink dress, twirling as usual, arms flung wide like she owned the world. The plaque outside read, "In celebration of curiosity and courage, sponsored anonymously." Mateo stayed near the back, watching. When the speeches ended and the crowd filtered inside, he slipped away to his office upstairs to grab a file. He just opened the door when a small voice piped up behind him. "Mr. Mateo, your office is messy." He turned to see Leia standing in the doorway, hands on her hips. He smiled. "Wasn't expecting company." She marched inside like she lived there, then paused at his desk. Her eyes lit up. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for the small box he'd left slightly ajar. Mateo moved to stop her, but paused when she looked up at him with that innocent, unfiltered honesty. "Is this for Mom?" she asked. "'Cause I think she likes you now, a lot." Mateo knelt beside her. "It's not a ring for asking a big question, but maybe for making a promise." Leia considered that, then nodded. "That's okay. She still likes promises." Downstairs, music played softly, and the scent of fresh-baked cookies floated through the air. Mateo spotted Tessa near the doorway, talking to a reporter from the town paper. He walked over and gently touched her elbow. "Can I steal you for a second?" She turned, surprised but smiling. "Sure." They stepped outside to the back garden, where string lights hung between trees and the laughter of children echoed faintly from inside. Mateo took a breath. "This town's changed," he said. Tessa raised an eyebrow. "You mean you've changed?" "Maybe both." He pulled the small box from his pocket and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "This ring," he said, opening it slowly, "isn't a proposal. Not yet. It's a promise, Moa." Tessa's eyes welled as he continued. "A promise that I remember you now. Not just that moment in the library, but everything since. And I won't forget again." She didn't speak, just nodded through the tears, lips trembling. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a delicate, simple band with a pale stone, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. From behind them, a giggle erupted. They turned just in time to see Leia bounding down the steps. "Mr. Mateo," she shouted, flinging her arms around his legs. "Now you're stuck with us forever." Tessa laughed through her tears. Mateo crouched to scoop Leia into his arms. "Stuck with you? That sounds like the best deal I've ever made." And under the soft glow of garden lights, surrounded by the sounds of a library reborn, the three of them stood together. Not just as strangers crossing paths, but as something whole, something new, something worth staying for.